Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Hoffman. I'm a security architect and a technical author based out of the Pacific Northwest. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Here I create videos on cybersecurity, programming, and occasionally other topics that interest me. The date at which this video was recorded is the 4th of November, 2022. That means that the 2022 midterm elections that determine our new legislators are scheduled for 4 days from now on the 8th. Now, I made this video because I want to convince you, my audience, to vote in the midterm elections, but I don't want to tell you who to vote for. Rather than telling you who to vote for, I wanted to make a video to arm my audience with knowledge regarding how to find and read a bill, aka a proposal for a new law. See, once you become good at finding and reading bills, you'll be able to understand at a much deeper level what the people you are voting for are actually trying to do with our country. In the case of this video, I live in the United States of America, so everything that I teach you about the judicial, legislative, and executive branches of the government in this video are direct references to the way they're structured in the United States, and it may be different in your country. See, news stations and politicians will lie to you on a daily basis, and they'll say anything to convince you to vote for them and donate to their causes. There's a lot of dark money in America in politics. But if you can find and read legislation without resulting to someone else's summary, quote unquote, then you will be armed with the best possible knowledge required to make an educated decision when you decide to vote. By the end of this video, you will understand the three main branches of the US federal government and their primary responsibilities. You will understand the two main factions of the legislative branch, aka the branch responsible for creating new bills which eventually become laws. And most importantly, you'll be able to find, read, and interpret bills that are from that legislative branch. So by completing this video, if you make it to the very end, you'll be able to understand the entirety of what a politician, newscaster, or influencer is pushing you to vote for, but without all the lies and propaganda that typically shroud away the truth of a bill. You will be able to go directly to the source, find the information that you're looking for, and make an educated decision without anyone else trying to influence you in one direction or the other, and without the deception that typically surrounds those processes of influencers, politicians, etc., pushing you to vote one way or the other. So before you're going to be capable of understanding how to find and how to read a bill, you really need to understand what a bill is, where a bill comes from, and the powers that those that introduce bills have in order to influence the way that life works in America. So in the United States of America, the federal government is split into three distinct groups. Each of these distinct groups has different powers and responsibilities. These groups are as follows: the legislative branch. That's the branch we're primarily going to be talking about in this video. This branch is responsible for making laws, and it's comprised of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Next, there's the executive branch. This branch of the US federal government is responsible for enforcing laws, as well as the day-to-day operations of governing citizens. This branch includes the president, vice president, and the president's cabinet. Finally, there's the judicial branch. This branch is responsible for evaluating laws and punishing lawbreakers. At the federal level, this is the Supreme Court, aka the court of last resort. So in the US government, in the federal government, we have the legislators of the legislative branch, and they design bills which become laws. We have the judicial side, which enforces those laws and evaluates those laws. And we have the executive side, which is really responsible for the day-to-day high-level operations. Now, each of these branches of the US federal government can change the acts of other branches, so they each can influence each other. The way that this was designed was originally to be a set of checks and balances to prevent one branch of the federal government from becoming too powerful. See, the president can veto legislation created by Congress. So if Congress has legislation for a bill, at one of the phases, the president can say, no, I don't want that to pass. And it becomes much more difficult for that legislation to go from its current form into becoming an actual, in practice, law. Next, Congress can confirm or reject president nominees, and they can also remove the president from office in certain circumstances. You all are probably familiar with this process, the process of impeachment. And finally, the justices of the Supreme Court can overturn laws that they deem unconstitutional. So now that we've walked through all of the different branches in the US federal government, let's focus in on the legislative branch, the branch responsible for drafting and proposing bills, which eventually can be voted on to become laws. So let's talk about the legislative branch of the United States federal government. Every few years, midterm elections are held. This is near the midpoint of each president's four-year term. It's always early in November. And each midterm election, 100% of the House of Representatives and 1/3 of the Senate is re-elected. Now, both the House of Representatives and the Senate can write and propose bills. So these are your lawmakers. And bills, like noted before, are draft versions of up-and-coming laws. After either a House member or a Senate member writes a bill and proposes it, then a voting process begins. First, the House of Representatives has to vote on a bill. Next, the Senate votes on a bill. Now, if the bill has at least 50% of each of the Senate and House's vote, it goes to the president. The president now has a say. The president can either say yes and vote and it becomes a law, so this is how a law is made typically, or the president can vote no, called a veto. Now, if the president votes no and both the House and Senate vote 2/3 majority, the bill can be passed into law form without the president's consent. In other words, if more than 50% of both the House and the Senate vote on a bill, the president must vote in order for it to become a law. But if 2/3 of both the House and the Senate vote on a bill, it's possible for that bill to become a law without the president approving of it. And this is the process by which any new law is introduced at the federal level in the United States of America. So now I'm going to teach you how to look up a candidate and determine what a candidate is going to vote for, so that once we go into the next segment where I teach you how to read a bill, you'll be able to decide if this candidate is voting in a way that benefits you. So, finding voting patterns of politicians. Well, there's two types of politicians. So we'll call this the two types. Type number one is a candidate for a first election. Now, they don't have a voting history. And as a result of that, the only way we can determine what they're going to vote for is their claims, their social media, their interviews, and potentially past positions. So this is maybe they held a position in somewhere outside of the US Senate or House of Representatives. You can look back at their voting history for a local election and see what directions they voted in. But ultimately, if it's the first election of a particular politician, you can't get a lot of information on their voting patterns. However, most politicians don't meet that criteria. Most are returning politicians. And when it comes to returning politicians, we can get a lot of hard, raw data to help us determine if we should re-elect these politicians. See, when it's a returning politician, there's actually a lot of data that we can look at in terms of their voting records. So we can look at voting records, we can look at voting patterns, and later on, we can even look at things like financial interest to see if there is a potential conflict of interest or insider trading, etc. And using these metrics, we can better determine if we should re-elect a candidate, because we'll know based on real data, not based on news media, not based on influencers, and not based on political claims if this person is voting in a way that benefits us and the ideology that we want to see more of in the United States of America. Well, how do we do this? How do we look up the records of returning politicians? Let's start with a really popular politician, not for the sake of any political claim, but simply because most of you have probably seen her on the news. Let's go to AOC. This is a Democratic House of Representatives member representing the 14th District of New York City. Now, if we want to see if AOC's voting patterns match her claims of what she believes in her political ideology, we can do that by looking up her voting records. And the way we do that is we can go to a number of websites. Some websites where you can find voting records include GovTrack, ProRepublica, or VoteSmart. In this case, we're going to use VoteSmart. So we're going to go VoteSmart, voting AOC. We want to see the voting records. You can even type in voting records. And there's going to be a couple links here. We want to skip the political summary. We're not actually interested in anyone's summary of a candidate. That's what we're trying to bypass. We want to see what they vote for. We don't want to see an analyst, a newscaster, etc. telling us who they are and what they're about. So let's go to her voting records. So we can see that AOC is a US House of Representatives member, District 14 Democratic. And if we scroll down, we can see her key votes. So these are votes on major bills. Now, if we go to page 5, we'll see that the oldest record here is in 2021, National Commission to Investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol Complex. She voted yes on this. Let's find one she voted no on. You can see Department of State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Appropriations Act 2022. That's a no vote. So by going to VoteSmart or GovTrack or ProRepublica or a number of these other websites, you can find the votes, and it even says right here, how does this politician's votes match her positions? This is what we're trying to find out. We're trying to find out, is this politician voting the way they claim they're voting and for the bills that they claim they're voting for? And do the bills that this politician's voting for match the way that we want to vote? In other words, as a citizen of the United States of America, you cannot directly vote for a bill to become a law, but you can vote for candidates for the House of Representatives and the Senate who will vote on behalf of your interests in order to make bills become laws. And this is the foundation of the US Democratic Republic political system. So now we know how to look up candidates and bills. So the next thing we need to do is learn how to actually find a bill once we know the name or the bill number and read a bill. So we've discussed how to find the voting patterns of a legislator in the United States of America. Now, how can we look up the actual content of those bills rather than the title of the bills, which can be deceiving despite efforts to prevent them from being deceiving? So here what we're going to do in this segment is we're going to learn how to find a bill and then how to read a bill. So let's start by how to find a bill. Well, luckily we're alive in the 21st century, and as a result of that, we have access to the internet. And it turns out there's a website called Congress.gov where every public bill that's being voted on is accessible. And on the top left, we're going to click this drop down, we're going to click Current Congress. So we want to have the current Congress, and we want to see what they're voting on. And for the sake of this video, I'm going to look up a particular cybersecurity bill simply because I have a lot of context given my background in the realm of cybersecurity. Now, the bill that I'm going to be looking up is HR 5440, but you can even go in here and search things that are important to you like cybersecurity. And as you can see, there's a large number of bills proposed for cybersecurity purposes. Now, I'm going to cut through looking through all these, but if you're looking for a bill on a particular topic, you can simply type in your keyword here, and the search is pretty good. And then what you can do is you can scroll down until you find your bill and use the filters on the left if you need a little bit more specification. So the bill that I'm looking for, that I'm going to teach you how to read, is a bill called HR 5440. Here we go. So HR 5440 is Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act of 2021. So we're going to click on this and it's going to open up a new page. Now in the user interface here, you'll see a few things that are important. One thing that's important to note is the bill has a sponsor. Now the sponsor is the person who is in either the Senate or the House of Representatives who proposed this bill, not necessarily who wrote it. So I think I mentioned prior that almost anyone can write a bill in the United States of America, but you have to have a legislator to propose the bill to be voted on. So here you can see the committees involved, the House and the Department of Homeland Security. And one that's really important right here is the tracker. This is in fact one of the most important components of reading any bill on Congress.gov. So as you can see, this bill has been introduced. It has not yet passed the House, so the House hasn't voted on it. It has not yet passed the Senate. It has not yet been in front of the President, and therefore it is not yet a law. It is simply a bill that may or may not someday become a law. So on the first page, you have a summary. And the summary tab here is actually incredibly important. You should not trust the summaries of bills from the majority of sources. And the reason is because there's a lot of political bias and there's a lot of dark money in the United States, especially in regards to the federal government. But the summaries that you see here are actually written by an organization in the US federal government called the Congress Research Service, CRS, and these people are paid salaries and incentives to keep them non-biased. This is unlike news media. They are not paid with advertising. They are not paid with corporate sponsors. So if you want an overview of a bill, this is one of the best resources for finding an unbiased overview. Granted, there is still some conditions where this may be a biased overview. But given the fact that financial incentives are not there for bias, it is less likely that you will find bias in the summary written by the CRS on Congress.gov. So if you ever want to cut through the fat and get a summary, but you don't want to read the whole text, go to Congress.gov, go to summary. Now you can see there's several tabs here. There's tabs including titles, which are alternate titles that you could search for in order to find this bill. There's committees and related bills. So these are various people, places, and organizations that are related to this bill for further reading. But the most important part here is the text tab. And in the text tab, you will see the full text version of this bill, which brings us to the segment, How to Read a Bill. So starting at the top, you can see that this bill was introduced in House, and we have the date at which this bill was introduced in the House. This is good when we're reading a bill because it gives us some evidence as to the likelihood of this bill passing soon, especially when we cross-reference it with a tracker at the top. In this case, it may be a while until anything happens with this bill. Now, some bills, depending on the complexity and the topic, can be passed in as little as weeks. Other bills can take years to make it all the way to a law or to eventually be discarded. Now, if we look through the bill, we'll see right here, this is the ID of the bill. So if you ever want to officially look it up, you can look it up by this reference number. This is very similar to the way that a primary key in a database works for those of you who follow me and are in the tech industry. And effectively, it is just a unique identifier for finding this bill. Typically, the bills will have a combination of letters and numbers like this. And if you go a little bit lower, you'll be able to find short titles. In this bill, you find the short title right here, section number 1, short title. This act may be cited as the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act of 2021. This is very important. This is a legally valid nickname for this bill. That means this bill can be referenced either using this or using the text-based name, which is easier for humans to understand and comprehend. And in fact, this is preferred a lot of times because it makes context significantly easier on the other side when you're dealing with references, because whoever's reading the bill doesn't have to go back and forth. And if you see a bill that constantly uses an identifier like this versus using a short title, you may be reluctant because they may be trying to incentivize the reader to not read the related materials. So here we jump into section number 2. And section number 2220A is actually pretty important. Many well-written bills will start with a list of definitions. The reason for this is because not all of the senators or congressmen have the same background. In this case, this uses terms like cloud service provider, which is referring to things like AWS or Google Cloud Compute. It refers to cybersecurity incidents. It refers to threat indicators. It even uses some terms like covered entities, which you'll see in cybersecurity insurance. Now, if we scroll down even further, we have terms like managed service provider, sometimes called an MSP, which is a third party that assists a company with their technology, their implementations of vendor software, and sometimes their security, etc. Supply chain attack. In my industry, this is referring to a type of attack that typically uses third-party software or some non-first-party software in order to insert vulnerabilities into a developer's software. So right off the bat, we have a set of definitions. So A is definition. So they're defining in this bill the terms that are going to be used later. Now you'll note right here A is in lowercase. This is really important because eventually the way that these bills are formatted becomes very difficult to read. So you're going to have a multi-level formatting similar to a bulleted list in any bill you read on Congress.gov. So let's scroll down. We read through section A right here. Let's find section B. We have Cyber Incident Review Office. There is an established agency, and it is a Cyber Incident Review Office, and it is designed to receive, aggregate, and analyze reports related to covered cybersecurity incidents. So we see that covered term again. We see cybersecurity incidents again. And effectively what this bill wants to amend, and you'll notice at the top it says it will amend, to amend the Homeland Security Act of 2002 and establish a new office, the Cyber Incident Review Office. So the goal of this bill is to amend an existing bill in order to establish a new Homeland Security Office focused on cybersecurity. Now we scroll down just a little bit further and we get to the bottom and we can see some related bills from which we can click through and learn more information in regards to the way in which this bill is structured. So what have we learned from this? Well, we've learned quite a few things. First of all, you can find almost all bills, so let's say all public bills, you can find on Congress.gov. Now there are a few exceptions. These are called non-public bills, but they're very rare and they typically involve people or organizations where confidentiality is considered to be required. Now there have been initiatives to reduce the amount of these bills, so it's likely that 90% or more of all bills introduced to Congress or the Senate will go through Congress.gov. So that's how you find a bill. Now how do we read a bill? We just walked through this cybersecurity bill. Granted, we more or less skimmed it given the amount of time in this video, but first of all, we can start off by the reference number. That's important to document. In this case, we're looking at HR 5440, and we know that this is basically a unique ID. Now, below this, we have a sponsor. We want to know who the sponsor is because that tells us who brought the bill to be voted on. And in this case, it is Representative Clark, YVE-TTE. If we go down a little bit further, we can see the tracker, and the tracker is the status, and in this case, the bill has just been introduced. Now, we can see, if we look at the raw text of the bill, that the bill was introduced in the House on 0930, so introduction is going to be the 09-30-2021. We have tabs here where we can see the summary, and we can say that the summary is a good source of potentially unbiased abstract, and the reason for that, as aforementioned, is because when we click on this, it's actually authored by CRS, which is government funded, for the sake of being non-biased. Now that doesn't mean that the abstract is going to be non-biased. That means financial incentives are better than media. That's what that really means. So we can read the summary, also called sometimes the abstract, if you see it listed elsewhere. And if we move on, we can click the text tab to get the full bill. Now, as we went through this bill, we saw a number of interesting and common components of a bill. So we'll do the bill components down here. Many bills have a short title, aka a nickname, which is in fact legally valid way of referencing it. Many bills have a set of definitions. And it's important to read the definitions because the definitions you have in your mind might not meet the way they are defined within the bill. So we read through some of these definitions. Next, we're going to actually start to read through the meat of the bill. So one thing that's noticed is a bill is cut into sections. So we have sections, we have headings, and subheadings. In this case, we were looking at the majority of data being comprised of subheadings with a lowercase structure. So in this case, we were looking at the lowercase headings, e.g. A. And by doing that, we were able to read the meat of the bill. And I noted that because later on, you'll see that the way in which the bill is formatted is actually uses uppercase 2 to denote headings that are indented several lines in. So it's important to understand the way in which the bill is formatted in addition to the way in which a bill is structured. Next, when you have a bill like this, you'll often have a number of categories that say things like what the bill is designed to do. Very similar to the abstract. And we found this right below the definitions. In fact, we found it right here in B. Furthermore, as we went on, we figured out who they'd have to hire in order to make this bill into a reality, in order to turn this office into a reality. So we found that under requirements and procedures, which was effectively job duties and timelines. From this, we learned that they want to hire a director, and they want this director to have a variety of responsibilities. Responsibilities being defined after Part D. Looks like that is actually D, not B, the backwards B. Furthermore, we go down a little bit more, and after they've defined the responsibilities of these employees, they have to define what the employees are allowed to do and not allowed to do. This is a new role in the US government, so it's going to have new responsibilities and new restrictions. In this case, we found a lot of this, if I remember correctly, in Part F and Part G. So let's go back and let's find Part F and Part G. Here we have non-compliance with required reporting. So we have G and F, which gave them a little bit of leeway in regards to reporting responsibility based on my quick scan. And I think if we go down even further, we find that they have some authority granted, and the authority is in G, 3, A, B, and C. So that's going to be G, 3, A through C. Scrolling to the bottom, we can see sections that include references to other relevant bills. And this is effectively how you go about reading a bill. So first you find the bill, then you read the bill. And what you want to do as you're reading a bill is definitely take notes, because these are legal documents and they can from time to time be difficult to read, especially if you have a limited time frame. Now this bill, HR 5440, is not a very complex bill. In fact, if you look at it, it's probably something like 10 pages if you were to print it on a printer. However, there are bills that span hundreds of pages. In these cases, it may not even be effective for you to read through the entire bill, and it may be more effective to find relatively reliable, unbiased summaries of the bill. For example, the summary in the Summary tab on Congress.gov, which is authored by the CRS. So that's the end of today's video. I really wanted to help and teach all of my viewers a little bit more about how to cut through the fat, how to find the votes of politicians in order to determine if you should vote those politicians back into office, and how to find a bill and read through a bill in addition to some of the common components of a bill, so it's a little bit easier for you to sift through and learn for yourself what you're actually voting for. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you vote in the upcoming midterm election, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you for watching this video. Finally, if you want to see more videos from me, consider subscribing, and have a great day.